A lonely rancher knocked saying, "You need a rancher," but the Apache woman did the unthinkable. The first rays of the sun stretched across the dry Arizona plains, painting the rugged hills in soft gold. The air was cool, almost still, except for the occasional chirp of a bird or the faint rustle of dry grass. In the middle of this wide-open land, a small, humble home stood, surrounded by dust trails, a few stubborn cacti, and a herd of goats grazing lazily under the morning sun. It was the home of an Apache woman, known among the few who visited her land as strong, independent, and fiercely determined. She had built her life with her own hands, maintaining her household and caring for her small herd, relying on no one but herself. Her mornings always began early. Before the sun climbed high, she would check the animals, ensuring each one was safe, healthy, and had enough water. Her routine was simple but strict, shaped by years of self-reliance. She liked it that way. She liked knowing that everything she had, every living creature she cared for, was the result of her own effort. Outsiders often assumed she needed help, but she rarely let anyone close enough to offer it. Her pride, her culture, and her history of facing challenges alone had taught her that the best person to trust was herself. That morning was no different from any other, at least until a sudden knock on her door interrupted her routine. She froze, one hand still gripping the metal gate as she looked toward the sound. The knock was firm, deliberate. Not the casual tap of a neighbor or the timid knock of a visitor who didn't know better. It carried weight, as though the person knocking knew exactly what they wanted and expected to be answered. The woman narrowed her eyes. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones rarer still. She hesitated before slowly opening the door a crack, her hand resting on the wooden frame. Standing on her porch was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with a broad frame and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent under the open sky. His eyes were sharp, steady, and carried a quiet confidence. He wore the kind of clothes that said he worked with his hands, not in an office. Boots caked in dust, a wide-brimmed hat, and a rugged shirt that had clearly seen hard labor. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice calm but firm, "but you need a rancher." The words hung in the air, simple yet bold. The woman's first instinct was disbelief. She blinked, unsure whether she had heard correctly. Need a rancher?
For her?
Her pride surged. She had been running her land for years, keeping her animals alive through droughts, storms, and unexpected challenges. She had done it all on her own. And yet, there was something in the man's eyes that made her pause. He was not arrogant or condescending. He was confident, yes, but not in a way that demanded submission. It was a quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing one's own worth. She took a cautious step back, gesturing for him to wait. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but wary. "And why would I need a rancher?" He tipped his hat slightly, a small gesture of respect. "My name is Thomas," he said. "I know this land, I know livestock, and I know when someone could use an extra hand." The woman's eyes narrowed. "An extra hand," she repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. "Or are you here to take over what I've built?" "I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to help if you want it. But I can't force you to accept it." The woman studied him, her mind racing. There was something different about this man. He wasn't like the strangers who came and went, promising the world but leaving problems behind. He seemed genuine. Still, she was no fool. She had been burned before by those who offered help with hidden agendas. She had learned the hard way that trusting too easily could cost more than it gave. "I've managed on my own for years," she said, trying to sound firm. "I don't need anyone." "I figured you might say that," he replied, "but sometimes even the strongest need help. A storm can come without warning, a herd can fall ill, and sometimes two people working together can save more than one could alone." She felt a flicker of irritation mixed with curiosity. How dare he lecture her on something she had spent her whole life mastering? And yet, the logic in his words was hard to ignore. She had spent nights worrying over the herd during dry spells, waking early to ensure each animal was safe. She had repaired fences, dug wells, and even fixed broken equipment by herself. And still there had been times when she had barely managed to keep everything intact. Perhaps, she thought reluctantly, having another person around could make a difference, but she would never admit that aloud. "I'm not saying you can't manage," Thomas continued, noticing her hesitation. "I'm saying you don't have to do it all alone. And I promise, I respect the work you've done. I won't interfere with it. I just want to help protect it." The woman's hand drifted to the gate, her mind torn between pride and practicality. She wanted to refuse him, to shut the door and return to her routine, but a small, cautious part of her wanted to see what this man could do. Not because she trusted him yet, but because she needed to know if he was capable, if he truly understood the challenges of life on this land. "All right," she said finally, her voice measured. "You can stay for a day. Just one day. If I see you're useless, you leave at sunset." Thomas smiled, a hint of relief in his expression, but his eyes remained steady and serious. "Fair enough," he said. "One day, I'll do my best to earn your trust." And so, the man stepped onto her land, carrying a sense of purpose that was unfamiliar to her. He didn't boast or claim ownership, he simply moved with confidence, his eyes scanning the terrain, noting the condition of the fences, the location of water sources, and the state of her herd. The Apache woman watched him carefully, noting his actions, his attention to detail, and the respect with which he handled her animals. As the day unfolded, Thomas proved himself useful in small but meaningful ways. He helped mend a broken fence, worked with the goats to ensure none wandered off, and even carried water to areas where it was needed most. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was clear he listened. He asked questions about her methods, her routines, and the history of her land, showing a genuine interest in understanding rather than imposing his own way of doing things. By late afternoon, the woman found herself reassessing her initial judgment. Perhaps there was something to having another person around, someone who could work alongside her without trying to take control. She still wasn't ready to trust him fully, but she couldn't deny that his help made her work easier and more effective. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, the woman felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, because she had managed to maintain her independence while still allowing him in; curiosity, because there was something about Thomas that intrigued her; and a small, cautious hope, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. When evening came, Thomas prepared to leave as agreed. He tipped his hat again, showing respect, and said simply, "I'll come back tomorrow, if you'll let me." The woman hesitated, her pride warring with a new understanding that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face every challenge alone. Finally, she nodded, saying nothing but allowing him to sense that his presence was not entirely unwelcome. That night, as she looked out over her land from the porch, she reflected on the day. The Apache woman had always believed that asking for help was a weakness. But watching Thomas work, seeing the care he took with her animals and her property, she realized that perhaps strength wasn't only in doing everything alone. It was also in knowing when to accept help from someone who truly respected what you had built. And somewhere in the quiet of the desert night, the faint sense of a new chapter began to stir. A chapter that would challenge her pride, her independence, and perhaps, in time, her heart. The next morning, the sun rose over the desert in the same golden light, casting long shadows across the leaded hills. The Apache woman woke early, as always, moving quietly through her small home so as not to disturb the animals. She had spent the previous day watching Thomas work, noticing the care he took with her herd, the way he respected her land, and the patience he showed even when tasks seemed small or tedious. She could not deny that his help had been useful, yet she reminded herself sternly that she was not used to relying on anyone. She had built her life alone and had survived challenges others might have thought impossible. Trust was not given lightly, and she would not give it freely. When she stepped outside, Thomas was already there, waiting by the gate. He tipped his hat in greeting, a small smile on his face. "Good morning," he said. "Ready to start early?" She nodded, folding her arms across her chest. "I don't need hand-holding," she said, her tone polite but firm. "We work together, yes, but you follow my lead." "Understand?" Thomas nodded, as if he expected no less. "Of course." "Your way first, I'll follow." There was something about his humility that made her pause. Many outsiders would have tried to prove themselves by taking charge, but Thomas had shown respect. He did not underestimate her. He did not assume that because he had experience he automatically knew better. Instead, he asked, observed, and learned. That attitude, strange as it was to her, sparked a hint of curiosity in her mind. Their first task of the day was the water troughs. The previous afternoon, she had noticed that a few of the troughs had low water levels. The Apache woman carried buckets from the well, while Thomas offered to help carry heavier loads. Together, they moved water to the farthest pens, ensuring every animal had enough. She noticed how he treated each animal gently, speaking softly to them as if they could understand his words. For a moment, she allowed herself to watch, to see if he had the patience needed to work on her land long term. After the water task, Thomas suggested they inspect the fences. "Some of the posts look weak," he said quietly. "If a goat leans against one, it could fall." The Apache woman's first instinct was to argue that she had seen worse and managed it, But she studied the fence and saw that he was right. One post was rotting at the base, barely holding the wire taut. She motioned for him to take a hammer and nails while she fetched the replacement wood. As they worked, she noticed something else. He did not rush, he did not complain. Even under the harsh sun, he moved with steady focus, treating every task as important, no matter how small. She felt a strange mix of frustration and admiration. Frustration, because he reminded her that she did not have to do everything alone. Admiration, because he seemed genuine, not just efficient, but caring. By mid-morning, the woman realized she was speaking more than she usually allowed herself with anyone. She explained why she placed the water troughs in certain spots, how she rotated the herd, and how she kept watch for predators. Thomas listened intently, nodding, occasionally asking questions to clarify, never interrupting, never dismissing her methods. He asked about the Apache traditions she followed with her land and animals. He asked why she did certain things in a certain way, and when she answered, he didn't judge. He simply learned. For the first time in a long while, she felt someone was truly listening to her, not just hearing words, but understanding the reasoning behind them. It was disarming. She had never expected to find such patience or respect in a stranger, and yet she reminded herself again that this did not mean trust. Trust had to be earned. She would watch him. Her first test came during lunch. While they ate in the shade of a large mesquite tree, she casually mentioned that the goats had been restless at night, some disappearing for hours before returning. Some nights are harder than others, she said. I have to track them, make sure they are safe. It's not easy. Thomas nodded. I understand, he said simply. Would you like me to help you track them tonight? She raised an eyebrow. He did not push. He simply offered. She considered for a moment. Allowing him to come with her at night was a bigger step than she wanted to admit. But then she remembered the one goat that had fallen into a ditch last week and how difficult it had been to rescue it alone. Perhaps one night of company wouldn't hurt. All right, she said cautiously. Tonight, we track them together. But follow my instructions. I am the one who knows these hills and these animals. You follow or you leave. Thomas agreed immediately, with a small smile that did not overstep. I follow. I won't interfere. The day continued with small chores, checking the feed, inspecting the fences, and clearing debris from a dry creek bed that could block water when it rained. All the while, the woman observed him carefully, noting his actions, his respect for her work, and the effort he put into each task. He did not complain, he did not boast, and he did not try to claim credit. He simply worked. By late afternoon, she noticed something that surprised her. She felt lighter. The work that had seemed exhausting when done alone felt easier with him around. Not because he carried the burden entirely, but because he shared it. And yet she was still careful with her emotions. She did not smile openly. She did not laugh. She remained reserved, her independence intact. When evening approached, she prepared for their night tracking. The desert had a different feeling at night, quiet, mysterious, full of shadows and soft sounds. She had walked these trails alone many times, but tonight was different. Tonight, she had someone beside her. They moved carefully among the hills, watching the goats as they grazed or rested. Occasionally, a goat would wander too far, and she would gesture for Thomas to help bring it back gently. He followed her directions without question, and she found herself surprised at how naturally they worked together. Hours passed, and the woman found herself talking in ways she rarely did. She spoke about her childhood, about learning to care for animals, about the challenges she had faced in running her land alone. Thomas listened, offering thoughtful comments or simply nodding, never interrupting, never judging. There were moments when the woman caught herself noticing him in a different way, not just as a helper, but as someone whose presence felt steady, reassuring. She quickly dismissed the thought, scolding herself internally. She could not let herself get attached or dependent. That was dangerous. That was not how she survived. But the more they worked together, the more she saw a different side of life. One where partnership did not mean loss of independence, where help did not equal weakness. And though she refused to admit it to herself, she began to wonder if this man could be trusted, not just with work, but perhaps, one day, with more. By the time they returned to her home, the night sky had spread across the desert, filled with stars that shone brightly in the clear air. The goats were safe, all accounted for, and her property remained untouched. She felt a quiet relief that had nothing to do with Thomas's presence and everything to do with knowing her animals were secure. Thomas, noticing her relief, spoke softly. You did all this alone for years, he said. I'm just glad to be here to help now. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. One day does not mean trust, she replied. I'm still the one in charge here. I know, he said simply. I only want to help. Nothing more. The woman did not respond, but she felt the truth in his words. He did not seek to control, to impress, or to take over. He sought only to share the burden. And for the first time she realized that perhaps sharing the burden did not make her weak. It made her stronger. As Thomas prepared to leave for the night, she felt a small, strange hesitation. She did not invite him in. She did not ask him to stay. But she also did not ask him to go. And in the quiet of the desert night, she sensed that this was the beginning of something unexpected, something that could challenge her pride, her independence, and perhaps her heart. The Apache woman went to bed that night with her mind full of thoughts. She thought about the day, about Thomas, and about the unusual sense of companionship that had grown, almost unnoticed. She reminded herself that she was strong, independent, and capable of surviving alone. But deep down, she could not deny that there was a new possibility forming, a hint of trust that she had not felt in years. And somewhere beyond the hills, under the endless sky, Thomas left quietly, aware that the day had been more than just work. It had been the first step in earning a place in her life, a place that he knew would require patience, respect, and understanding. The following days passed with the steady rhythm of work and quiet observation. The Apache woman and Thomas settled into a routine that was both new and strangely familiar. She remained cautious, her pride intact, but she could not deny that his presence made the days feel lighter. He did not try to rush her or take over. Instead, he followed her lead, learning her ways and offering help when necessary. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience on both sides. Thomas arrived early each morning, before the sun had even risen, and the woman would already be outside checking the herd. He worked alongside her, carrying buckets, mending fences, and observing her techniques. Slowly, she began to notice the subtle ways in which his skills complemented hers. When a fence post was too heavy to lift alone, he would step in without hesitation. When the goats wandered into a tricky area, he would guide them back carefully, following her instructions to the letter. He never acted as if he knew better. He acted as if he was learning, and that made all the difference. One morning, as they repaired a section of the corral that had been weakened by a recent storm, Thomas paused and looked at the woman. "You've done all of this alone?" he asked quietly. "It's incredible how much you manage." The woman shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. "I've had no choice," she said. "It's just the way life is here. If you want something done right, you do it yourself." Instead, he picked up a hammer and continued his work, silently showing her that he was willing to share the burden without diminishing her effort. She couldn't help but notice how reliable he was. Even in the harsh sun, his movements were steady, deliberate, and careful. It was a sharp contrast to the hurried, careless labor of men she had worked with in the past. As the days continued, small conversations began to appear between the work. She told him about her childhood, about learning the ways of the land from her parents and grandparents. She spoke of the lessons they had taught her, lessons about patience, observation, and respect for every living thing. Thomas listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions without ever judging or interrupting. It was the first time in years she felt that someone truly understood her world. There were challenges, of course. A sudden thunderstorm rolled over the hills one afternoon, sending a portion of the herd into a panic. The Apache woman barked instructions, running after the frightened goats, while Thomas followed without hesitation. He helped to guide them into a safe area, keeping calm when some of the animals became stubborn or frightened. She realized in that moment that his presence was not just helpful, he was dependable in emergencies. Someone she could rely on, without worry, without fear of interference. That night, after the storm had passed, they sat outside under the stars, tending to the remaining chores and checking for any damage. The desert was quiet except for the soft sounds of the animals settling down. The woman glanced at Thomas and noticed something she hadn't expected, a gentle patience that didn't demand attention, but simply existed. She felt a small stir of trust, a recognition that he was not there to take over, but to be present, quietly, respectfully, and reliably. "You work hard," she said softly, almost as if she were testing him. "You don't have to. I can manage." "I want to," he replied. "I want to help. I don't want to replace you or take over. I just want to be here so you don't have to carry everything alone." She looked away, unsure of what to say. Pride and caution clashed with a strange warmth that had begun to grow. She had spent years managing alone, believing that relying on anyone else was dangerous. Yet here was someone who seemed to understand that help did not equal weakness, and that made her question the walls she had built around herself. The next challenge came a few days later. One of the younger goats had wandered too far and become trapped near a rocky ridge. The woman knew the area was dangerous. One wrong step could injure the animal or even a person. She turned to Thomas, hesitating. "I'll go first," she said. "Watch the others." "We go together," he said. "It's safer." "You've done this alone, yes, but I want to make sure nothing goes wrong." They moved carefully, side by side, each step deliberate and cautious. The woman observed him closely, noticing how he anticipated obstacles, adjusted his movements, and stayed alert without panicking. When they finally reached the trapped goat, Thomas helped guide it safely back to the herd. She realized in that moment that partnership did not mean surrendering control. It meant working together, sharing the responsibility, and protecting what mattered. Back at the ranch, the woman and Thomas sat quietly after tending to the animals. The sky was painted with soft hues of orange and pink, signaling the end of another long day. She realized that she had begun to rely on him, not because she was weak, but because she trusted his judgment, his skills, and his respect for her independence. There was a subtle change in their dynamic. She spoke more freely, sharing small stories from her life, her past, and the traditions she cherished. Thomas listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply nodding, showing that he valued her words and her history. In return, he shared bits of his own life, stories of working the land and lessons learned from years of managing ranches. The exchanges were careful, respectful, and building a quiet bond neither of them fully acknowledged yet. One evening, as they prepared to secure the animals for the night, the woman noticed how naturally Thomas had become part of her routine. He didn't intrude, he didn't take control. He simply moved alongside her, offering help when needed, and following her guidance when it mattered most. She felt an unfamiliar comfort in that presence, a recognition that she was not losing independence, but gaining support. A week into Thomas's help, a crisis struck that tested their trust in a way neither expected. A wildfire started on a nearby hill, carried by strong winds toward the grazing area. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of crackling flames grew louder by the minute. The Apache woman's heart raced as she realized how quickly the fire could reach the animals. Without hesitation, she ran toward the herd, shouting instructions to Thomas. "Get the water!" "Move the goats away from the dry brush." He followed immediately, grabbing buckets and guiding animals with care. Together they worked with urgency, not panic. The woman noticed how calmly Thomas handled the stress, how he stayed focused on the task, not the danger. They guided the herd to a safe area, away from flames, mud, and smoke. She felt a surge of relief when every goat was accounted for. After the fire had passed the immediate area and the threat was gone, they sat quietly, catching their breath. The woman looked at Thomas with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "You didn't have to risk yourself," she said. Thomas shook his head. "I wanted to," he replied simply. "I wasn't going to let the animals, or you, face it alone." For the first time, the Apache woman allowed herself to feel something she had long denied. Trust. Not blind trust, but recognition that this man cared, not just about the work, but about her, the land, and the life she had built. She still remained careful, still guarded, but the walls around her began to shift, imperceptibly but unmistakably. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger, though it was still unspoken. They shared routines, troubles, and successes, learning from each other. The woman noticed that she looked forward to his presence, to the quiet efficiency and respect he brought to her world. She realized that she was beginning to see him not just as a helper, but as someone reliable, steady, and trustworthy. Yet she reminded herself constantly, trust must be earned, and she would not give it fully, not yet. She observed him, tested him with small tasks, and watched how he reacted under pressure. Each day he met those tests with patience, skill, and respect. Slowly she began to acknowledge that partnership could exist without compromising independence. By the end of the week, the Apache woman and Thomas had established an unspoken rhythm. She gave instructions, he followed them with care, he offered help, she accepted it with caution. The work was more efficient, the animals safer, and the land better cared for. And somewhere in that balance, a quiet bond had begun to form, a bond built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared effort. As the sun set over the desert one evening, painting the hills in gold and crimson, the woman stood quietly outside watching Thomas secure the last of the gates. She realized that something profound had changed. She no longer felt the exhausting weight of absolute responsibility. She no longer felt entirely alone. And though she would never say it aloud, she felt a flicker of hope, a recognition that perhaps, in Thomas, she had found someone who could share her burdens without taking them away from her. And in that silent desert, under the endless sky, Both of them understood something without saying it. Trust was growing, respect was solidifying, and the days ahead would test them further, but now they were no longer facing them alone. The desert morning arrived quietly, as it often did, with soft golden light spreading across the hills. The air felt calm, almost peaceful, but the Apache woman sensed a change she could not fully explain. Life had been different since Thomas started helping. The work felt lighter, the days more balanced, and even the long evenings did not seem as lonely as before. Still, she reminded herself not to become too comfortable. She had built her strength through independence, and that part of her would never change. Thomas arrived early again, just as he had every day for weeks. There was something steady about him that the woman had come to rely on without admitting it openly. He greeted her with the same respectful nod, never crossing boundaries, never assuming more than what she allowed. That quiet respect had slowly earned him a place in her daily life. That morning began like any other. They checked the herd together, made sure the water troughs were filled, and inspected the fences. The goats were calm, the sky was clear, and everything seemed in order. But later that afternoon, something unexpected happened that tested both of them once again. A strong dust storm began forming in the distance. The woman noticed it first, a growing wall of dust moving slowly across the plains. Storms like this could disorient animals, damage fences, and make it difficult to breathe or see clearly. She knew they had limited time to prepare. "Storm's coming," she said firmly. "We need to move the herd closer to shelter." Thomas didn't question her. He immediately started guiding the animals, working alongside her with focus and urgency. The wind picked up quickly, carrying dust through the air. Visibility dropped. The goats became restless, some trying to scatter. The woman stayed calm. She had faced storms before, but never with someone beside her who understood the urgency without panic. Thomas helped block escape paths, secured loose gates, and reinforced the shelter area. Their teamwork was smooth now, almost instinctive. Within an hour, the herd was safely gathered. The wind howled outside, dust swirling through the air like a thick curtain. They retreated to the house, closing windows tightly and waiting for the storm to pass. Inside, there was an unusual quiet. Normally, she would sit alone during storms, listening to the wind and worrying about the animals. Today was different. Thomas sat across from her, calm, patient, not filling the silence unnecessarily. After a while, she spoke softly. "Before you came, storms like this were harder. Not just the work, the silence after." He simply listened. "I always believed being alone meant being strong," she continued. "And maybe it still does, but I'm starting to see something else too." "What's that?" he asked gently. "That strength can also mean letting someone stand beside you, without losing who you are." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's all I ever wanted. Not to replace your strength, just to support it." When it finally passed, the sky cleared gradually, revealing a calm evening. They stepped outside together. The air smelled fresh again, and the land looked peaceful despite the earlier chaos. They checked the herd carefully. No animals were missing, fences held. Water sources were intact. It was a relief, not just because everything survived, but because they had managed it together. As the sun began to set, the woman stood quietly watching the horizon. She thought about the past weeks. The first knock on her door, her suspicion, the careful testing of trust, the shared work, the wildfire, the storms, the long nights checking animals together. Something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily, like the slow shaping of land by wind over years. Thomas started gathering his tools, preparing to leave for the evening as usual. He never assumed he should stay. That respect had always mattered to her. But today, as she watched him prepare to go, she felt a hesitation she could not ignore. "Thomas?" she called. He turned immediately. "Yes?" She paused. Words did not come easily to her, especially words about emotions or trust, but she knew this moment mattered. "You don't have to keep leaving every night," she said carefully. "There's space here. Work is easier when you're around, and I've come to trust you." Thomas looked surprised, but he did not rush toward her or celebrate loudly. That restraint was exactly why she trusted him. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied. "Not as someone taking over, not as someone changing my life, just as someone sharing it." That was the unthinkable decision for her. Years ago, she would never have imagined allowing anyone to stay, to share responsibility, to become part of her daily world. Independence had always been her shield, but now she understood something deeper. Independence did not have to mean isolation. Thomas accepted quietly. No dramatic gestures. No promises he couldn't keep, just a simple agreement built on respect. Days turned into weeks again, but now the rhythm felt even more natural. They divided work without speaking much about it. He respected her traditions, her leadership, her connection to the land. She respected his experience, his patience, and his steady support. Neighbors began noticing the change too. The ranch looked healthier. The animals were calmer. And the woman herself seemed less burdened, though still strong and self-reliant as ever. Evenings became moments of quiet conversation. They shared stories, plans for improving the land, and sometimes simply enjoyed the silence together. There was no pressure, no dramatic declarations, just a calm understanding growing between them. The Apache woman realized something important during those peaceful evenings. Trust had not appeared suddenly. It had grown through actions, small, consistent acts of respect, reliability, and patience. She also realized she had not lost her independence. She still led, still made decisions, still honored her traditions. The difference was that now she did not carry every responsibility alone. One evening, while watching the herd settle under the fading light, she spoke again. "You know," she said, "people think the unthinkable thing was letting you stay." Thomas smiled slightly. "Was it?" "Because I spent years believing I needed no one. But I learned something." "What did you learn?" "That strength is not only standing alone. Sometimes it's knowing when someone truly deserves a place beside you." Thomas didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Life continued, not perfectly, but steadily. There were still storms, still challenges, still hard days, but now those days felt manageable. Shared effort made burdens lighter, and mutual respect kept their partnership balanced. The woman never stopped being strong. Thomas never stopped respecting that strength. And together they created something simple but meaningful, a partnership based on trust, patience, and shared purpose. The desert remained vast and quiet, the land still demanding hard work, but now the ranch no longer felt lonely. It felt alive, supported, and hopeful. And for the Apache woman, that was the true, unthinkable change, not just allowing someone to stay, but realizing that connection did not weaken her strength. It made her life richer, steadier, and unexpectedly peaceful. Under the wide-open sky, with the herd safe and the land calm, she finally understood that independence and companionship could exist together. And that realization, quiet but powerful, marked the beginning of a new chapter neither of them had expected but both had quietly hoped for.